Hello and welcome to a special big game preview podcast ahead of this year's Investec Champions Cup final between five-time winners Stade Toulousain, more affectionately known as Toulouse, and Irish juggernaut Leinster. Bags are being packed, flags are being made, and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is poised for a vibrant rugby spectacle and a rare trophy on their rich soil. I'm sure I'm the only one to think of that joke. Joining me tonight, I'm joined by two friends of the pod whose excitement and fear and everything in between knows absolutely no bounds on a night like tonight. Tom Coleman and Keano Miller, welcome back to the show.
Cheers, Kaelan. Nice to see you again, Keane.
Yeah, great to be back, Kaylan. Thanks for having us. Good to see
And
you there, Tom.
I'd just like to remind everyone you can catch this on YouTube, on your Spotify platforms, podcast platforms, wherever it is, on the go, wherever. We are recording a little bit late earlier because, we'd be a bit short for time with the whole 24 hours for club things. So we won't be talking about the lineups as we usually do, but we will start with the pre-game chat with the excitement levels as we so often do on this show. Tom, I'll start with yourself. You have noted before on these airwaves that you've been to many European finals. Where's your excitement levels at less than 48 hours before kickoff?
Muted, I would say. I think that's just cautiousness over the last sort of couple of finals have been. This will be final number 8 for Leinster. Thankfully, I've been at the mall, or this will be the mall. I'll be at the mall if I get there over the weekend. So yeah, slightly muted. I think because of the scars of the last couple of years, just really want to get over the line. So and I've got a bit older where you just realize it's totally out of your control. So you might as well just embrace the what will be. And the way I've sort of focused this week is just concentrating on my coaching mind and sort of clinical mind on the areas we can win the game, rather than worry about the areas where we can lose the game, because there's plenty of those as well. But that's it's if we lose, I'm going to feel shit post match. So there's no point in feeling shit pre-match. That's my learned experience. So I'm just embracing it now and just happy enough to go to London the weekend and hopefully get a result.
It's funny enough you say that because we have insider intel that says that our other guest is kind of taking the other route and is a little bit fearful at the moment. Keno, we spoke before we hit record. Where's your excitement levels at? As Tom mentioned, it's been a couple of finals now for Leinster where they haven't gotten over the line, but does that bring with it a sense of maybe this is our year?
No. Honestly, I'd love to say that I'm full of confidence and all that, but no, I'm a bag of nerves. I tend to not get too anxious about rugby games anymore. Like you get a bit older, you get a bit more mature. You don't. Finals, though. Finals absolutely just do my head in, especially a final like this where there's absolutely nothing but I have nothing I can hang my hat on. I can't say, well, I reckon it's going to go this way because of this. Either way, even if we were the underdog, because I point to one thing and say, I reckon that'll do for us. Then at least I'd have an idea one way or the other. It's not knowing. It's the sword of Damocles hanging over your head in the dark. That's the one that kills you.
No, that's completely understandable. I know we did a Heineken Cup final preview for this podcast last year. Both tipped La Rochelle. I'm sorry for that. The other person was Gavin Casey at the 42, so you can blame him if he tips Leinster. Both tipped Leinster last year, not La Rochelle. Both got it wrong. We both tipped the Stormers, myself and Jeff Neville, last year for the URC. So I think as podcast host, it's only right that I, not give a prediction in case I'm some sort of all over the place type, but it's also right that I, try and keep ye on the cam and on the straight and narrow, because I do know what it's like to be in your shoes. Insert Munster joke there, but I do know what it's like, and I do, I do want to give a sense of ease, I suppose. Mentioned there at the top of the show, we don't have team sheets, so in lieu of that, we're going to focus on the form before we get into kind of where we see the game being won and lost and all that we so often do on this show. Keen, I'll let you start us off with Leinster because so much talk over the last couple of weeks is they're flappable in the URC for the first time in donkey's years. They do look flappable. They're no longer top. That crown is with Munster. They may be better off not finishing third, as it turns out, and getting a bonus point win over Connacht in that weird anomaly that they now find themselves in. And they have cause to bemoan the injury gods, just like everyone else. even though this has never been the case for Leinster in May. Where do you think they are right now? Where do you think they are stacking up? And are we reading too much into some URC games? Are we probably, right to have cause for concern? Where do you think they are?
Yeah, I mean, you used to be able to draw fairly clear parallels between URC slash Pro 14, Pro 12 form and Europe, certainly with the Irish sides. But I don't really think that's possible anymore. It's become abundantly clear that you just can't challenge on two fronts in the URC as Leinster used to do in the back in those days, and other Irish sides as well, to greater or lesser extents. Um, so yeah, there's been less focus again on the URC this season than there was over the last two seasons, I think. It's now abundantly clear that Europe is top priority, and there's no two ways about it. That kind of classic risk reward strategy, going in for that high risk, eggs in one basket, and it's not paid off the last 3 years. But they've really doubled down on it this year with a very callow performance in South Africa and a disappointing result up in Ulster, unfortunately. And as a result of that, actually injuries to Natai and Tommy O'Brien. But in regards to those latest injuries, I don't think they would have. The fact that they were playing actually, and the policy that's in place now, quite clearly, I don't think they were going to ever feature in this 23 for the final. In some ways, actually, the Mocker gods have at least grimaced at us, if nothing else, in getting back Ryan and Keenan, even if Ringrose doesn't seem to have made it on in time, which is a shame, given some of the issues we've had around speed and penetration in attack. Ryan was huge for us in the final last year, up until he caught that injury, and that really seemed to be a turning point in the game. So having him over 60 plus could make a huge difference to this game. And Keenan, I mean, no one covers the backfield like Keenan. He is singular. As fullbacks go, he's right up there amongst the best in the world. So to have him back, with that Toulouse kicking game coming down the line is huge. So all in all, injury wise, barring Rose, it's looking like a full complement, but maybe a bit limited game time under Ryan and Keenan's belt.
Absolutely. It's funny you mention Keenan, because I think it was mentioned on this pod among others that arguably the second best fullback in Ireland is Hugo Keenan at 80% or at 70%, even if he's not quite there, because he does have that profound effect. It's phenomenal. Now, we don't have team sheets, but it is expected to see Will Connors set to start at open side with Josh van der Fleer on the bench, which is interesting. Probably not the way I go myself, but listen, that's just me. I might touch on that in just a moment, but Tom, like on the face of it, those losses that Keane mentioned against the Stormers, against the Lions, and against Ulster, they probably don't mean a lot, especially in the grand scheme of things. But Leinster have fallen agonisingly short. We know this since 2019 and onwards. But then the flip side of that argument as well is they have just steamrolled Toulouse. 2 thumpings in the last 2 years. How do you think that mental game will play out in that regard? Because you could argue Toulouse will be going for revenge. We might talk about that in a minute. But at the same time, Leinster have their number. Leinster are a perfect team to take on Toulouse. So do you think form is the cliche true? Does form go out the window a small bit with these two?
To a degree, it does. I think it's just the space we're in, the media space. So, if you go on to X or Twitter or the Irish and British media, we're all following accounts. So there's more focus going to be on Leinster, given the surrounding, with our own media and people like yourselves. We follow each other on Twitter and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more analysis on Leinster's strengths and weaknesses. The reality is if the teams were reversed and this was a Leinster team coming in playing Toulouse for the third time in 3 years after getting 2 Hockey-ins, the focus on Leinster's failings in those 2 games would be through the roof. So Toulouse, I'm sure the opposite happens in France. I'm sure France, the media are looking at going, how are you going to beat this Leinster team? You've really struggled against them in the last 2 years, really not fired a shot. So I think it's a lot down to the space we live in. Obviously, myself and Cian as Leinster fans, and supporters, and we'll obviously focus on our strengths and weaknesses. You know what I mean? So that's a natural thing. But I think Toulouse somewhat are in between Britain and Ireland sort of escape sort of criticism. Any media you see, it's looking at the form that they've had. It's sort of, I won't say fait accompli that Toulouse is going to win or anything like that, but there's no discussions whatsoever on any chinks. Where Leinster's chinks are well discussed, whether it be Ross Burns kicking or maybe some scrum issues or the tack been a bit blunt. So we're everybody's well voiced and everybody has an opinion on social media on Leinster's failings, but sort of Toulouse gets a bit of a free pass here. In answer to your question, yeah, look, psychologically, Toulouse, if you're trying to put on a neutral hat here, have to get over some hurdles to beat this Leinster team because they haven't really come close. I think it's 4 wins and 5. Leinster have, and the one win that they've had down in Toulouse was a 29-28 win on a pitch that was absolutely soaked by Toulouse before the game, just to slow the ball down. And fair dues to them, it's their pitch, they can do what they want. But you're talking about monkeys on backs and stuff, and we've spoken about Ireland or Leinster, whatever the case may be. Leinster has been a bit of a monkey on Toulouse's back for a good few years now. So it'll be interesting to see what they try and do different, rather than just focusing on solely focusing on what Leinster have to do to beat them. I think the ball as much as in their court, what they have to do different, because if they keep doing the same thing, I know they're playing against a slightly different Leinster team this year rather than the Lancaster Cullen one. This is a sort of a different type of a Leinster team, but it's still Leinster, as in it's still the two clubs playing each other. So it'll be interesting to see what Toulouse try and come up with something different, because what they've done before hasn't worked.
No, that's absolutely true, and that's probably, it's not necessarily true for Leinster that they have to, try something different, but it looks like they will. So the report from Murray Kinsella in the 42 this evening says that Will Connors set to start at number 7 ahead of Josh van der Fleer, Jordan Larmour to retain his place on the wing ahead of Jimmy O'Brien, with Jamie Osborne again set to start in midfield. A couple of people saw the Irish Times article this morning and probably thought maybe they've been tipped off. Maybe that is the case in this regard, because this is kind of the team that people were expecting Jason Jenkins or Ross Maloney to start with James Ryan on the bench. Seems to be another one. And I suppose pretty much just whether they go 6-2 then from there, or whether you go with Kieran Frawley, or whether you go with perhaps Jimmy O'Brien on the bench is another question. Someone like that with maybe Cohen or Van der Fleer missing out, as Murray Kinsella points out. And I know this wasn't on the running order, but seeing as it's come up from a good source, we should probably touch on it. Keno, I'll start with yourself. If Leinster go with Connors, so much talk about his tackling and all that, but there will probably be an element, and maybe it'll come true, maybe it won't, is maybe they're just going to try and get in Antoine Dupont's face. And with that, like Munster did a few years ago, maybe this allows Doris and Porter to focus on Dupont, and Connors can do more of this stuff, 5 to 10 meter channel outside the ruck, in that kind of channel. How do you see that particular call, if it is to be that? How do you see that going?
Yeah, no, I think what we're probably going to see is very similar lineup to the La Rochelle game, as it was originally announced, rather than kind of as lined out on the day. So I think, yeah, I can see Connors had a specific role on the day against La Rochelle in man marking, essentially, the man marking the man mountain, which worked very well. As to how they will organize that, because yeah, I mean, part and parcel of playing this Toulouse team is containing Dupont. You have to. Like, you can't let him do whatever he wants, or you're going to come out the wrong end of things, most likely, 9 times out of 10. As to who does what, it's hard to say.
Could we see Doris defensively more in the breakdown role? I suppose just more of not necessarily disruptor, because I feel like that would do him a disservice, but focusing on accuracy in how they slow down Toulouse, because you can't just try and overpower the mountains that they have. You have to be accurate and precise, which is probably Doris. He's probably the biggest strength for that for Leinster when it comes to his ruck work.
He is a big strength for that. McCarthy is possibly still a little broader in his application, let's say. Although Ryan is excellent at that as well, so I'm kind of wondering if they might start Ryan and bring him into that ruck torpedo role, especially on the defensive rucks. Um, there's a number of different ways they can go with it, depending on how they want to play it. There's not going to be huge movement, but I mean, I could see possibly Ryan starting beside McCarthy, depending on how they want to play it. Or yeah, it could be Maloney if they with Ryan on the bench, or it could be Jenkins if they want to go more off the scrum. I think the only sure thing there probably is that Joe McCarthy starts. And hits who partners him, and you've got to bear in mind who calls the lineouts as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of the
if
ruck,
Maloney doesn't start, you assume it's Baird calling lineouts
yeah,
in it. And look, he's played every minute of European rugby for Leinster this season. This is a big spot, and this will be a big test for him.
yeah, most lineout takes as well in Europe. So he's pulling them on himself for the most part, and our lineout has been kind of at sixes and sevens though as well. So you want an experienced caller there on the day. It's reflection. It's such a balancing act. It really is.
Being fully fit is a mind map on his own. Tom, I'll let you come in just on the Connors call, the second row, the Larmer / O'Brien, and then into 6-2, all of that. Where be your thoughts, and what way would you look to go?
I'd be a lot more clear cut on I think what way it's going to pan out. I think he will start Connors. I think he will start Jenkins and McCarthy. I think Leinster's biggest issue since Christmas has really been the impact from the bench. And this game is going to be won in the last 20 minutes. I know we've blown them out of the water the last two times, but it's not going to be the case this time. And I think the impact of our bench players hasn't been what it has been. Alatoa, Healy, obviously, I'll give him every pass under the sun. He's nearly going on 20 years playing Heineken Cup rugby. So, but I think Kelleher's been quite limited on his impact off the bench as well. So I think that's where Van der Fleer, Ryan especially, will be needed in the last 20 minutes of the game. It's funny with Connors, it'll be interesting to see how if they do play him, how they'll sort of what role they'll play in him, because unlike La Rochelle, where he had a specific role on Skelton, Leinster tend to handle Dupont slightly different, as in, in the last three games, I think Toulouse have slightly shaded possession. But Leinster tend to, when they carry the ball, they tend to carry at Dupont to engage him in defence, and that stops him being a factor then if it does transition to Toulouse, he's sort of out of the game and you're sort of holding him in. So it's not like Connors will be standing off just the scrum or standing off the first phase and chopping down. I don't think, he'll be as effective against Peter Aki or somebody like that. He's a different type of player to Dante. So it'll be interesting to see what role they do. I only think I'd rather play Van der Fleer from the start, because he's a better player in this game. But I would be concerned about the impact of the bench. Connors is a class player, but he's not the sort of player that will give you impact in offense coming off the bench for the last 20 minutes. So I think if Connors and Van der Fleer are in the 23, I think Connors has to start for that reason and that reason alone. Where Van der Fleer, when he comes on, will have a massive impact in both sides of the ball. And it'll be that extra sort of oomph that we'll definitely need in the last 20 minutes of the game. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what pans out. I think the only other one is the O'Brien versus Larmer thing. I think Larmer will probably still get the spot. I think Nienbar likes him in that sort of scramble defense that he's been very good at. So I think that's a side of his game that's come on a lot, and we will need that given the sort of outside danger on the edges that Toulouse pose. They're a far more dangerous team on the edge outside than La Rochelle are. So we'll need wingers, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Jimmy O'Brien on the bench for that either. I think he'll be harsh and Frawley. then if your 10 goes down, you're really
Good.
snookered. So, Frawley would probably still get the nod. I think Jimmy O'Brien will be unfortunate to miss out. Yeah, it's a good quandary to have, but I do think Connors will start. I think Jenkins will start with McCarthy, and I think Larmour will start. I think they're the three main calls. I think Osborne is a given Ringroses woes. I think that's not even up for debate. I think it'd be a miracle if Ringrose all of a sudden appears in the centres. Um, and yeah, I think it's just be interesting to see what way they deploy Connors and what role they give him, because it'll have to be slightly different than his normal role.
Yeah, it will, and it is that chess match side of things, because probably one thing that Toulouse have not done very well is in the recent chess matches they've just knocked their own pieces off the table by moving things around needlessly at times. But that being said, they are kind of the master killers. They haven't lost a final since 2008. They've that's 8 in a row between top 14 in Europe in that time frame. And Tom, I'll come back to you to start in this one, because yes, they haven't gotten over the line against Leinster, and they do have to account for that. They have to account for, not getting over the line against Ireland and in the World Cup in recent years for a lot of their players. But they probably do have a winning mentality. They'll be, gunning for revenge. It's hard to say that won't be a factor for Toulouse, because ultimately that's, it's a club final, and club final rugby is very, very, very different to a normal league game.
It's very hard to weight up the intangibles. On one side you say, Toulouse will be going for revenge over the last 2 years. I would be surprised if the hurt of the last 2 years wouldn't outweigh that by a good factor from Leinster's point of view. So I don't think both teams will be shy of any sort of psychological motivations of trying to get this across the line. But Toulouse is a fairly settled team. There'll really be no surprises with their 1 to 15. I think the only toss up is Kinghorn and Ramos. The rest of the team pretty much picks itself. It's pretty consistent. The back row, I think they'll have, Jack Willis, who's really done well down there, and Francois Gross and Dumont. But that's an area Leinster can get at them too. You know what I mean? I think Leinster have the players to disrupt their sort of quick ball as well, a lot more than I think they do on us, if that makes sense. I think we have more weapons in our pack to disrupt Dupont's service than they do on us. Toulouse have racked up some big scores in the Heineken Cup, in the West Cup this year. But it's probably a bit unharsh. You can only beat what you can beat, but I'd question the opposition. Playing Harlequins twice, Exeter, Ulster. It's been a handy enough run, and fair dues to them, because they were sort of number one seeds coming in. They won the French league, so they got a good pool draw, and then obviously they got the number one seed, which is what it's all about. So I can't bemoan the fact of having a handy run in, when we've had the same over a few years as well. But in that time as well, they've let a lot of points in. So the Toulouse defense will have questions. Exeter scoring whatever it was, 20 points in it, or 20 odd points, and Quins have done it a few times. Even Bath was the other team as well they played. So I think, but they have the winning mindset, as you say. They've won finals. I don't know how they won the top 14 last year. They sort of pickpocketed right at the end against La Rochelle. Yeah, as Keano pointed out from the start, how do you feel about this game? There's just, you could draw a ledger on the debit and the credit side, and the list would be equally long on both sides about the psychologically part of the game, the areas they're strong and the areas we're weak, and how can you counteract that. I think that's why it leaves it very, it's very hard to call this game. And I think pre-match, I think the bookies were both 5 to 6. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't looked at it since, but they're normally not far wrong. Point or two in it, and it will go to the wire, and that's why I think Leinster need to focus on strengthening that bench, because it's an area where we haven't had the same impact. I know we've missed players, but I think we have an opportunity this time, more so than any other time this season, to really improve some sort of impact off the bench, that can make a difference in the last 20 minutes.
That's certainly going to be a factor. Even we might touch on it a little bit later on. We get kind of into the nitty gritty, but Keen, when we mentioned Toulouse and we mentioned that doggedness that makes them these kind of big match animals, they're also kind of that king of jouet, with Dupont and with Ramos and Ntamak. Like, even aside from Dupont, what stands out to you from their squad this season? Because without putting words in your mouth, I always think of Toulouse were so settled over the last 2 or 3 years. But when it came to the big game, they were hamstrung. They got injuries. They looked tired, different things. This time around, they've had no Dupont, they've had no Ntamak, they've had no Ramos, Flamand, Challonge. They've all missed, large passages of the season. Yet they're top of the top 14. They're in a European final. And it feels like the perfect recipe for, maybe not having the cohesion is overcoming that lack thereof. So what stands out from in your eyes?
You can look at Toulouse and ask, where haven't they been impressive, really? I mean, their back line, yeah, you got he who shall not be named. But I mean, Ntamak is a superb talent, and they make a wonderful playing duo together. I mean that great blend of tactical kicking, running threats. Ntamak has good vision. Like he sees what's going on. He knows what Dupont's going to be doing as well. And they make a marvelous playing pair. They got some massive forwards. I mean, you got Meafou, Marchand, Movaka. They're all physical presences, not to be sniffed at. You got versatile players as well. You got, like Ramos, who is not only a superb fullback, but a superb goal kicker as well. Able to ping it in from seemingly anywhere anywhere outside of the car park. Mathis Labelle, who's fabulous winger who can actually do a job of full back as well, of course, but actually off both wings as well. He's got pace and he's got finishing as well. Their set piece is pretty decent. Their line out is taking away above Leinster's at the moment in terms of percentage. Their scrum's been solid throughout the season as well. It's a good platform for them. They like to run counters. They like to run set piece plays. And turnovers, they've got multiple turnover threats as well. You got Willis, Mavaka, Marchand. They're all terrible men for the turnover. This is the bit I've enjoyed least doing my notes for this, making me think about exactly how good Toulouse are. Very many different things in rugby.
They really are. And like you mentioned, even like their lineup, and the one thing that came into my mind is, well, they've got Malvaca and they got Marchand. And yes, Leinster have Sheehan and Keller, don't get me wrong. Sheehan and Keller are also fantastic players, two of the best hookers in world rugby, but so are Malvaca and Marchand. And that's where, if you are going to talk about depth, and maybe Leinster's bench is more attributed to being able to see out games rather than attack games, Toulouse's bench can probably do a little bit of everything, depending on which way they go. And obviously, we don't have a team sheet. We can't judge fully, but it's probably what we'd attribute to them, that they can change things up. They can go for, with Kinghorn or Ramos, one of them is probably going to be on the bench. You look at that, for instance, as that's that little bit of explosivity, that you might want. Granted, once Blair Kinghorn doesn't run his mouth off in the press this week, I think, they should be fine. If he does, then I think they're absolutely destined to lose. But it is really interesting because Toulouse are a fine team, arguably a better team than they were last year. You could argue maybe Leinster are a better team in some facets. I'm not sure in the grand scheme of things if they are, but I could definitely listen to that argument at least. So on that, to kind of move into the final furlong as we get in there, where do we see Leinster winning or losing this game if it comes to pass? Cian, I'll start with yourself. There's so many factors, so many. But if it is going to be decided on certain things, where do you think they will be on the field, both positive or negative?
Okay, I'll fly through them fairly quick. What I have in my head anyway. Neutralize Dupont. He is vital to their game. They rely on Dupont and individual amazingness of multiples of their players to make things happen when nothing's on. You disrupt / neutralize Dupont, and you're taking away a lot of their attacking danger. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And the breakdown, both sides can't give them a sniff of a jackal breakdown, or they will get in over the ball and you will not shift them. At the same time, making absolute muck of their rucks, making sure it's nice and slow. And their power game, their power carriers like Meafou, I think that's possibly the job Connors is going to have, is to make sure that those heavy carriers are stopped dead, turtled if at all possible. Give a nice target for potential turnovers. Go past 50, 60 minutes. It has to be 80 minutes. We're not going to do it otherwise. We don't get that impact off the bench, as Thomas very rightly pointing out. You're not going to win this game. And controlling the emotions to rise into the game. It's a very big game. Again, it's the top of the league. It's the biggest prize in club rugby, arguably. And can't let that scar tissue from the past affect the game that's going to be happening on Saturday. If they do, then it's lost before it's started.
I would not 100% agree. Like I'm definitely in the same camp when it comes to being undecided. You know, like I can't nail my colours to the mast on this one, at least until tomorrow at 12:30 or whenever we get the team sheets, because it is so hard to call. Tom, I'll throw it back to yourself now, because there was, as Cian rightly alluded to, there's so much between these two sides. There's, how do you neutralize Dupont? Do you neutralize Dupont? Is another question. Do you just maybe go after Ntamak and just make Dupont do it by himself against probably man to man, pound for pound, the best club side in Europe? Do you neutralize the kicking game? Do you possibly really hone in on that defensive structure that Nienaber has and try to, do the odd bait and switch, which Leinster's defense really is, where they tell you, here's the space, go get it, but they shut you down? Like, there's going to be a factor of things that decides this one, but how do you see it unfolding in general?
Well, just going back to the top of the hour when I started the pod, how am I getting through this week? I'm just going to concentrate on the positives, because as I said, if we lose, I can feel shit post match. I'm not going to feel shit pre-match. So this is going to be plan A, B, and C, how Leinster can win this game. I think first and foremost with Dupont, you can only limit his game. He's such a class player that you're never going to take him out of the game. That being said, I'll go back to what I said earlier on. I think in the last 3 games against Toulouse, he's been the top and second top tackler, and that's because Leinster run at him. And if you gauge him in defence, he's out of the game temporarily. That if something happens in transition, he's not a factor. So I think that's how you go at Dupont. You pick him in the line and you carry into him. So that's what you'll see somebody like Jamie Osborne doing a lot, or Caelan Doris. You'll see them targeting Dupont channel. Nothing to do with softening him up. It's taking him out of the next phase, that he isn't less of an impact. So I think the proof, I don't think Leinster are going to go away from that. I think that's worked the last 3 times on limiting him. You make him tackle. I think he had 19 tackles. He was only I can't remember the guy who was top tackler the last time against Toulouse, but Dupont had 19 tackles in that game. So that's what you do. I think it'll be interesting to marry that plan with the Nienaber defence, on sort of shutting him down, or at least trying to shut him down. It'll be interesting to see what that happens. I'd say, strange enough, looking at Toulouse, one flaw I'd have in their game, and I mentioned it as a flaw in Leinster's, is I don't think their bench gives the same impact as people maintain. If you watch a lot of their games in Europe, from about 55 to 70 minutes, they ship tries in those period of games when they empty the bench. Marchand is obviously a class player. Richie Arnold is a class player. But going back to the likes of Will Connors and stuff, these are guys I think that should start games. Now, Meafou was playing so well at hooker that you have to play him. But if it was me, I'd be starting Marchand and bringing on my Meafou. I don't think you get the same impact. Don't get me wrong, Marchand is good over the ball. But the Toulouse do tend to lose their way, as Leinster have done, around that sort of end of the sort of third quarter. And you see teams against them scoring tries. And eventually, as they get going again, they get some late tries to pull away again. So I think if I was Leinster, I think Will Connor or Will Van der Fleer and Ryan coming off the bench. Hopefully, Kelleher finding a bit of form coming off the bench can make an impact. But with all due respect to Connacht, who we play the following week, I'd be hoping Tadhg Furlong plays more than 50 minutes. I think this is the game that he needs to extend that by at least another 10, maybe 15 minutes, 65 minutes or something like that. There's a few players like that I would like to see. I think obviously Porter will do a long stint as well, as he's well capable of doing. And I'd like to see Dan Sheehan doing a decent and long stint. So those players staying on for longer, to sort of overlap that time period where I see Toulouse slightly not firing on all cylinders, and the scores they shipped in that period of play throughout the Heineken Cup. I think there's a window there for Leinster to bring the likes of Van der Fleer and James Ryan on, leave on Furlong and leave on Porter and a bit longer, and try and call it make hay in that area where I perceive Toulouse get a little bit disjointed as they make substitutions. I think a lot of Toulouse's bench are what I'd call starter type players. They're not really that big of an impact. I'm not overly worried about Kinghorn and Ramos, who starts. Obviously, Ramos is a far better kicker. Kinghorn's a decent player. He's a good player, but he's not exactly, if we're afraid of Blair Kinghorn in the final in the Heineken Cup, well, then I may fucking start following somebody else. Like, the Toulouse aren't going to win the game because of him. Leinster will be well used to him. So, let's not paint some Scottish fullback as the be end of all. Leinster aren't going to lose a game because of Blair Kinghorn. They might lose it if Ramos kicks 100% and Ross Byrne has a 60% day. That's what I'd be more worried about. But yeah, that's where my focus will be. I won't be too worried if the team is named as I think it will be. I'd be looking at that window between 55 and sort of 65 to 70 minutes where we can change the game and get that sort of momentum back in our favour, as both teams either empty the bench or we leave players on longer. As I said, a wholly positive view to try and see where we can win. But that's what I'll be looking at when I'm nervously sitting in the stand going, okay, let's see what we can do from, that 55 minutes is sort of a cut-off point where Furlong tends to come off, or maybe even slightly earlier. I'd be hoping guys like that stay on longer. And as I said, the impact from Ryan and Van der Fleer coming off, that's maybe where Leinster can start edging the game back towards themselves.
I think
I said hopefully.
I think that minutes argument is really important. I know I haven't touched it before. You mentioned it because realistically, and I think most people would agree, you want Andrew Porter going about 70 minutes. In particular, if not more. Dan Sheehan and Rona Keller probably just make a difference there. Furlong, as he said, you probably want 65 minutes out of him, give or take. I think in an ideal world, Jenkins or McCarthy only get 60 each. I don't think they'd get, one of them gets the full 80. I don't think you get the most out of them when one of them does the full 80, which is fair enough given their role.
Jumping in there, I think McCarthy will do a lot of the minutes because he's been rested specifically the last 2 or 3 weeks for this.
Yeah.
So Jenkins will be the one that'll be hauled off on 50, say, and Ryan will come on for the last half an hour. If that's the way they go, I can see McCarthy doing big minutes. And hopefully what we've seen, sorry for cutting across you, Kellen, hopefully we won't see a little bit of painting by numbers by Leinster, the substitutions, because there's a little bit of that goes on. It's slightly frustrating. And I think, happened against Northampton. I just wouldn't. I'd be a bit head in hand now if I start seeing players automatically coming off at 50 that should be staying on. Furlong was having a great game against Northampton, and his minutes all season isn't huge, because he's we have to mind him. But if I can see Tadhg Furlong going off at 50 now, I'll be
yeah. I think it's a great argument because I think the flip side of that is, the players that Leinster need out there for the most amount of minutes. Mention Porter, mention Furlong, mention McCarthy. I think Doris does 80 almost automatically if he's fit. I think Gibson-Park, there's a very good chance Gibson-Park does 80 on Saturday. I think that's fair. So there's always the element after a 6-2 where you have to make a couple of injuries or make a couple of changes in the backline where they go extra conservative the following week. So I think we could see that out of Leinster as well. So I think Gibson-Park goes 80. I think Ross Byrne goes 80 minutes. I think James Lowe gets asked to go 80 minutes. Hugo Keenan gets asked to go 80 minutes. And I'm not saying this affects them, but I think it just shows the reliance on 5 or 6 players. Gibson-Park, number 1 of those, Porter, number 2 of those, and then a handful more. And that's probably where the talk of the bench. And I do agree there was probably a prescribed nature against Northampton, where you probably just wanted, okay, momentum swinging, maybe let's just hold off for 5 minutes. Don't give them that kind of 1% motivational itch, into the back of their brains. Hold off on it, and maybe, and you'd imagine Nina Barron Cullen will weigh up that, in the moment and in the weeks coming up to it. Keen, I'll throw it over to you, because listen, you can make a very good point to say the Leinster will win this game by 15 points because they have blitzed Toulouse in recent games. You can make a very good case to say that Toulouse will win a tight game because, bar the Northampton game, Leinster haven't won a lot of tight games in Europe in recent years. You can paint this game whatever way you like. So I'm going to hand you your blank canvas. How do you see it going?
Heart says Leinster. Head says, don't ask me. Look, I'll try to put some kind of reasoning on it. Look, Toulouse's flair can't be underestimated at all. They will score points. That's a given. It's going to happen. But I think if Leinster can constrain that unstoppable force with the disciplined defence first approach and take their opportunities when they come, and nail the line outs 5 meters out and kick the points when they're available and do it accurately. If they take their opportunities, then they might just do it. But hand on heart, it's going to be who blinks first. It's a coin flip.
It absolutely is. And if you were to, let's say it wasn't a coin flip, and let's say you had to anonymously submit a color, blue or red, leaving aside provincial
Always
bickering.
blue. Jesus.
Which way is your head leaning, do you think?
If there's nothing in it in the information available, which is basically the case this time, gonna have to let my heart win out and say back Leinster to do it.
Tom, you going along the same lines?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just I think it's funny. I think being a country lad, which I am, Meath, as you probably can tell. Um, I think a good combination for Leinster this year has been Nienbar's sort of, and you can see it on his, that South African documentary about the World Cup. Like he's not shy about throwing a few fucks into players, as in, and I think I'm not saying schoolboys in Dublin grew up in a sheltered environment, not at all. They're well used to cursing, but I think it's a good combination where these guys are consummate pros, Leinster players, just absolutely model pros. But I think he's added a bit of dog into them, verbally and physically, and I think that will be enough extra ingredients to see them over the line this time, where just sort of aggression rather than being painting by numbers, and if plan A doesn't work, go to plan B, instructor, and that doesn't work, you're in trouble. I think sometimes you just need a bit of fight, and he seems to be a good vehicle for infusing aggression into the teams that he coaches, as we can see in the World Cup. So I'm not saying Leinster didn't have that before. Well, actually, I am saying they didn't have that before. I think that's sort of just aggressiveness that and rawness that sort of country lads can bring, as opposed to refined Dublin fellas like Cian. But I just think it might be just that might be the difference this time for Leinster to win, that when they have to go to the well and it's half time, I know they'll all be calm and focused, but I think the part he seems to know when to rile up his team. Now that might be tomorrow night in the hotel at a last meeting rather than the dressing room at half time. But he just seems to have a knack of infusing sort of controlled aggression about what it means to win, and what it means to win for supporters and stuff like that, rather than maybe where we've fallen short before.
I agree with most of that. I think I'm not going to say that you would take a 1 point victory and all the kind of anguish and heartache that comes with it for the ensuing minutes like South Africa would have had. But if it's a 1 point victory for Leinster, they're not going to care. The same way if it's 15 or 20 or 40 points. I do agree with the Nienaber thing, but I think he's a proven winner. He knows how to do it. I think that probably ties into a point that other people have made where is this Leinster's kind of '09 and Leinster's kind of Munster '06 year again where win this and you feel like the dam will burst a small bit? Probably is. And hitting that emotional pitch becomes twice as important then because you can't want something that much and just go through the motions to win it. It doesn't work like that. Finals take on a life of their own. This final will take on a life of their own, life of its own. It's two Galacticos, it's two heavyweights, it's two teams who only know winning. Their culture is only about winning. It's not about second place. It's not about any of that. It's only about winning. And that's probably why you would almost steer away from Leinster a small bit in that regard as well, because Toulouse have to win. Like, how have Toulouse in the last 5 years since their uptick in 2020 only made it to one final? It seems unimaginable. They were terrible in the semi-final against Exeter one year. I think you could say they were terrible in the second half last year. They were actually good before Ramos, I think it was, or Entimac got injured last year. Fair enough, 2022, they were heavily depleted. Like they had gone, 100 plus minutes against Munster, and that's fair enough. That's a fair mitigation. So I think it's a balancing act. It's a real balancing act. I said at the top show, I'm not going to call it. I'm not going to call it until probably game day, to be honest. I've said Leinster all year, and I've said Toulouse would probably be undone by their cohesion or lack thereof. That doesn't seem to be the case, though, and that's where it is swings and roundabouts. It's going to be a tight game, I believe. I think it's going to be the tightest game between the two sides that we've had in recent years. But cracking final lays in store, and a proper spectacle of colour and noise should be there. If anyone bemoans the sight of Munster jerseys or Ulster jerseys, whatever, in the crowd like last year, feck off. This is the wrong place for you, because as ye two know, I haven't been at loads of finals and I've been to three myself. That's exactly what makes the European final special, and it's what will make a £1 billion stadium. The price of two Leinster players' yearly budget is what's going to make it all the more special on the day.
30% now. Less 30%.
So, oh yeah, sorry, the 30% factor has to be thrown in there, and I can't even slag that because Seth McKean advocated for something like that on this show a couple of weeks ago. So I have to give it due course. I have to do that. Gentlemen, I'll leave it at that. I do, on a slightly personal level, hope for yourselves that you get it done. Maybe not as a team, but if they've some compromises, happy medium to be done, coin toss, I don't know. Something like that. Listen, we'll wait to see. It should be a cracking final. Cian, Tom, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope you enjoy the game. And if anyone else is traveling over, which I know a couple of, I suppose, guests and listeners to this show, including yourselves, will be making the trip. I hope you do enjoy it. If you can't catch it from London, you can watch it 2:45 local time on Saturday on RT2, TNT Sport, and ITV. And we'll be back at the weekend with a review of the game. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening as well. If you do like what you see or hear, please do subscribe, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. Tell us why Leinster are going to win. Tell us why Toulouse are going to win. I don't mind. Whichever way you're leaning, I suppose. And you can find all of our links below, including this week's feature article, which was, of course, about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Simon Zebo, who announced his retirement during the week. Just to take the gloss off you, I think a small bit. It'll be very Zebo, especially after the 5 million remark they made a couple of years ago. But gentlemen, that's all we have time for. Until next time, enjoy the final from wherever you're tuning in, and take it easy. We'll be back very, very soon.